Good evening. My name is Essence Doucette, Second Vice President, Membership and Social Justice Chair for the Cleveland Section National Council of Negro Women. NCNW is very excited to partner with the Greater Cleveland Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated on this program about the legalization of marijuana and what that means for Ohioans. It is my pleasure to introduce the President of the Cleveland Section of NCNW for greetings. Cleveland Section President Monica K. McClellan.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Monica McClellan, and I am the president of the Cleveland section of NCNW. The National Council of Negro Women Incorporated was founded in 1935 by educator and social justice leader, Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune. The Cleveland section was organized in 1945 and is the first section chartered in Ohio. We have 79 years of service to the greater Cleveland community. The National Council of Negro Women is an organization of organizations comprised of 300 campus and community-based sections and 32 national women's organizations. That enlightens, inspires, and connects more than 2 million women and men. Our mission is to lead, advocate, and empower women of African descent, their families, and communities. Next, we have Social Justice Chair, Essence Doucette.
The National Council of Negro Women, representing more than 2 million women of African descent, recently charged all sections within NCNW to create and staff a social justice committee. The mission of the National NCNW Social Justice Committee is to provide a framework for local sections to promote civic engagement in our communities and advance public policy that improves the conditions of women and families of African descent. Some of the goals of the Social Justice Committee include providing a clear framework for NCNW to address national and local social justice issues, partnering with peer organizations and affiliates to address pressing concerns that negatively impact Black women and their families, be a visual and vocal force for the social and political landscape to ensure our voices are included in the public policy decisions and the governing of communities, schools, housing, health, and systematic legal issues, and engaging in activities that promote economic empowerment, financial literacy, collective wealth, and sustainability. On behalf of NCNW, we would like to again express our excitement to partner with the Greater Cleveland Alumni Chapter of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated on this program about the legalization of marijuana and what that means for Ohioans. Thank you. Our first speaker is State Senator Kent Smith, currently representing Ohio's 21st Senate District. Having been elected to the Ohio State Senate in 2022, prior to his service in the Senate, Smith served 4 terms in the Ohio House of Representatives from 2015 to 2022. Senator Smith serves as the ranking member of the Senate Energy and Public Utilities, Financial Institutions and Technology, and the Ways and Means Committees. He also serves as the Senate Judiciary, Transportation, and Rules and Reference Committees. He is eager to use his unique perspective and professional experience to improve the quality of life for the people of the 21st Ohio Senate District and working families across the state. Welcome, State Senator Kent Smith.
All right, can you hear me now? Nice. All right, yeah, happy to be here. I'm in my Senate office, as you may be able to figure out. And the drama that we had today was I blew out my transmission coming to Columbus, So arranged for a tow. So my car went north and I went south. But part of what that means is that I'm being driven home by another legislator. So I'm happy to be with you all and tell you how the Senate is handling this issue. But unfortunately, I'm going to have to drop off the call because I'm being driven home. So, but let me just quickly say that the email for my office is pretty simple. It's just smith@ohiosenate.gov. So if anybody has any questions after this, please feel free and email the office. And I'm sorry that I won't be able to stay on. But again, I need to get home one way or another. The other option is Greyhound has a bus that leaves at 8:30 in the morning. All right, so very quickly, as you all probably know, issue 2 passed, and it passed as an initiated statute as opposed to a constitutional amendment. The difference is that in the initiated statute can be changed by the legislature, whereas the constitutional amendment can only be changed by another vote of the people. So issue 2 passes as an initiated statute. I'm a Democrat. Frankly, the Democratic goal in the Senate was to try to keep it as close to. We sort of knew that issue 2 would get changed, but our hope was to keep it as close to, at least what we interpreted the general public wanted. And I actually think we made some improvements to it. So back December 4th, 5th, 6th, the Senate made some changes. Let me quickly kind of explain. I think the 3 things that the Senate added to the bill that I think were beneficial, and a couple of changes that I wish we wouldn't have made. The advantage is that this legislation will go over to the House. The House will have an opportunity to make some improvements. Then the 2 bills will go to conference committee, and it's that final version in conference committee where they'll try to merge the House and Senate version is kind of then what we'll be able to, we will vote on again, and hopefully the governor will sign it. Anyway, again, so the 3 improvements that I think were made were, number 1, the Senate created an expungement program so that low-level possession convictions, and we also set aside $15 million of state fund to help pay for these expungements, so that people that have gotten in trouble for marijuana possession that would now be legal would have a way to not continue to be penalized by that prior conviction. This was a top priority for Senate Democrats, and obviously we were very happy to be able to make it into the final version of the Senate legislation. The second change that I think was beneficial, and those of you that are in Cuyahoga County, you might know that we have a cigarette tax that is used to fund arts and culture program. The problem with the cigarette tax has been it's been slowly declining. So some of the arts and culture organizations that have relied on that funding have gotten, frankly, rather nervous. So I asked that we create an optional 3% excise tax on marijuana retail sales to fund arts, culture, entertainment organizations and programming if approved by voters. And that language made it into the Senate version also. So again, it's not an automatic tax. It's permissive by your county government. And then, of course, voters have to approve it. But again, this is one of the ways that we can sustain arts and culture funding if the voters so desire. The third thing was issue 2 did not allow, while it allowed for kind of immediate consumption, it didn't legalize sales anywhere. So that's kind of in the rulemaking process right now, but now it's, in Ohio, it's legal to smoke, it's legal to possess small, relatively small amounts, but you can't buy it anywhere. And we address that by allowing immediate sales at medical dispensaries with the legislation that we passed. 2 other changes that were made that I kind of thought made sense, and some people might like it, some people might not. We raised the sales tax on marijuana from 10% to 15% and reduced the amount of home grow from 12 to 6. And again, frankly, it was the majority party that wanted to do both of those. But what that does, if you look at all the states that have legalized, is it kind of puts Ohio in the middle of the pack on both taxation and home grow, which is to say there's the maximum home grow that was allowed in states that have legalized was 12. And there's some difference in, is it a flowering plant? Is it not a flowering plant? So you could probably say, Senator Smith, you're not accurate. And if we got into the details, you'd probably be right. But again, 12 was kind of the maximum. And we sort of brought it back to the middle of the pack. Some states that have legalized don't allow home grow at all. And some of them are blue states. And the taxation rate in issue 2, it was only 10%, which is the low end of taxation for marijuana sales. So we bumped that up to 15%. Again, that sort of puts Ohio in the middle of the pack. I don't think that's necessarily a bad place to be. The 2 changes that the Senate made that I don't think are beneficial, and I would hope that my House colleagues would take a look at. One is the issue of where legal marijuana consumption could take place, I think is a little too restrictive. In the respect that currently you're only allowed to smoke indoors at a private residence. And what that means is you can't smoke on your back porch, you can't smoke on your backyard. And I think that is an example of how it's too restrictive. Now, I will say this, and I think where the General Assembly is, I think you need to kind of have the marijuana smoking, I think, has to coincide kind of with the current indoor cigarette ban, which is to say we don't want waiters and waitresses and bartenders to be playing, smoke police with, is that a cigarette? Is that marijuana? You just you have to make those the same. And at the same time, I don't think you should be allowed to smoke while operating a vehicle in kind of in the same way, in theory, you're not allowed to be drinking while operating a vehicle. The other change is with where the funds were going to go. And I'm going to read directly from my notes. The issue 2, 36% of revenues would have gone to local communities, 36% would have gone to social equity and jobs funds, 25% to substance abuse, 3% to administrative costs. I think that made a lot of sense. The Senate added not percentages, but specific dollar amounts. Obviously, that can get problematic if you're either below sales or over sales. And they put a lot of money towards law enforcement, which again, I don't necessarily think was the spirit that issue 2 was passed. Now, does law enforcement need money? Sure, they do. But I mean, they also did some other things. Again, the money for the expungement program is in there. They put money towards poison control, which I think is a good idea. But there's not as much of the social equity job stuff that was in issue 2. So I would hope that my House colleagues, when they take this up, would probably go back to a percentage and not a solid dollar amount. And I do think that considering Republicans control the governor's office, the Senate, and the House, I think inevitably you're going to see some money for law enforcement in the final breakdown. But I would hope that some of the social equity and jobs stuff would get put back in. So, but again, issue 2 is currently the law of the land, because as you all know, the legislation has to be passed by the Senate and the House, and then it's got to get harmonized, and then it's got to be signed by the governor, and we're not at that process yet. But I do think the Senate has advanced this legislation in some positive ways. I ended up voting for the Senate version of the bill, in part because I was shocked that the Republican majority didn't just decimate it altogether. And, the expungement is important. Figuring out how to buy legally is important. And the optional excise tax for arts and culture, I think, would be a huge benefit. So I suppose I'm happy to take a question or two, again, not knowing how you've got this scheduled out. I don't know if I'm overtime or undertime at this point. But again, if you have any questions or if you need me to be a resource on this or any other issue, smith@ohiosenate.gov. Happy to be of any help that I can. Is that okay?
Thank you, Senator Smith, for joining us today. I believe there is one question in the chat that you may be able to answer. The question is, we currently have substance use prevention programs for youth from organizations like Prevention Action Alliance. Will there be any funding via taxes for this and or other organizations?
Yeah, so in the Senate, so again, I gave you the percentage breakdown, and in theory, on issue 2, and in the version that was issued, that issue 2 is passed, 25% of the revenue is for substance abuse, the substance abuse fund. So I'm assuming obviously that would be divvied up kind of across the state to a variety of programs. In the Senate version, again, we went with hard dollar amounts, not percentages, but we did have, I saw it just a moment ago, 25 million for substance abuse treatment. So both the Senate version and issue 2 do send some money into substance abuse programs. Again, one's a percentage, and I think that's the smarter way to go, and one's a hard dollar amount. Anything else?
Yes, there's one more question. Did you say dispensaries can sell it now or they cannot?
Yeah, so thanks for that, because I did kind of fly through it. They can't right now. That's one of the problems with issue 2 is it doesn't, I mean, they will eventually, once the kind of the rulemaking process gets completed, there will be legal sales. The state of Ohio is trying to sort of figure that out right now. What the Senate version did, which again was passed by the Senate, and I'm hoping the House keeps this, is what we thought that was a problem that we could fix by letting the dispensaries that sell medical marijuana currently to begin selling recreational marijuana while we figure out how we're going to open up legal sales across the state. So currently, you cannot buy it legally in Ohio, but that will be coming. Again, the Senate version tried to address that right away.
And one last question, we know you have to go, so we appreciate your time. Will the expungement process for low-level offenses and removing arrest records be intuitive, accessible, and easy?
Well, so it's not law yet. Again, I think that's one of the improvements that the Senate made is we were going to fund it with $15 million. So not only were we going to create an expungement program for people that have gotten convictions for what would now be legal possession, we thought that was a good threshold. But we were also going to fund it. So, but again, that's something that I would encourage the House to maintain. In the Senate version, again, I've got 2 criticisms of the Senate bill. One is the where can you smoke it, and the other is the use percentages for revenue, not hard dollar amounts. But yeah, that's I would hope that an expungement, a version of expungement, exists in the final version that the legislature eventually adopts. But will it be easy and accessible? You know, fingers crossed. But that the final version of the expungement program doesn't exist yet.
One last follow-up question. Do you know if the THC level will be lowered?
I've got to go to my notes. I think we did reduce it. Forgive me for not, but again, this is going to be a negotiated, it's got to get negotiated between. Yeah, I can't find it at the moment. I'm sorry.
Do you have a website or any reference material we could go to find out about the licensure process for having?
I found the THC in my notes. So issue 2, THC content no less than 35% up for the plant, 90% for extract. The Senate version, 35% for the plant, which was the same, 50% for fully processed extract. So again, that's going to be an issue that the House is going to have to take up. So we we kept it at the issue 2 level for the plant, lowered it for the extract. And I'm sorry, because I was excited that I found that I missed your other question. The question was about the licensure process and
for having a dispensary. Do you have a reference website we can go to learn more about that?
I don't. I would say you could email my office though. Again, I think we're sort of in process on that. I know the state is trying to, the state has hired somebody. I actually spoke to an attorney that works with this type of legislation, has worked with other states, and he actually thinks Ohio's in a pretty good place compared to some of the mistakes other states have made. But this individual was actually really happy about who the state of Ohio had hired to start trying to administer the whole program, which again made me optimistic that the state was bringing in some folks that had some expertise in this, and we could learn some lessons from some of the other states. But yeah, this is more of a state of, again, the legislature could change it. There is some local, I think there's some local control over it at the moment. But again, that process is still in play.
Well, thank you, Senator Smith, for joining us today. We appreciate your time.
Yeah, happy to do so. Again, happy to be a resource, and thank you all very much for these forums. Obviously, the better that we can inform all Ohioans, the better off, the stronger our democracy will be. So thanks very much, Delts, for doing this.
Thank you. Okay, so our next speaker is Representative Juanita Brent. She is in her third term as a legislator and is honored to continue representing and fighting for the people of District 22. Currently, she serves as the ranking member of the Agricultural Committee, while also sitting on Energy and National Resources, Commerce and Labor, Homeland Security, and Transportations Committees. In addition, she is the first vice president of the Ohio Legislative Black Caucus, which is the oldest Black caucus in the nation. Welcome, Representative Juanita Brent.
Hi, everyone. My name is Juanita Brent. I just happen to be a state representative. If you look in the chat, I've given you all my business, my email, my social media, my Facebook, my everything. Now, there's been a lot of different changes when it comes to cannabis here in the state of Ohio. And most people want to know, now that they voted something in, how can they still be involved with the process? There is a process that's still going on. Senator Smith talked about what happened in the Senate. There's also a bill that's happening in the House. So what's happening right now, because we are nuck, then you buck at the State House, and there's a fight for leadership. There's a Senate version of the cannabis bill, which is House Bill 86, which is what Senator Smith talked about. But then there's a cannabis bill that the House is working on, and that's House Bill 354. So everybody needs to be aware of both of these bills and where the progress of their bills are. So just to keep everybody up to speed, there's issue 2 that everybody voted for in November 2023. There's House Bill 86, which voted with majority vote of 29-2 votes in the state Senate. That got voted out in December of 2023. Then the House has their own version of the adult use cannabis version, and that's House Bill 354. So we got 3 things going on simultaneously. Let's see. Okay, you can see my 3 fingers going on simultaneously. So everybody just needs to know that. So even though the House passed House Bill 86 and the senators are all excited about it, we don't like their bill. We don't like their bill. So the reason why for all of this, and one of the things is about, particularly when it comes to expungement. I know people are excited about money going towards expungement. We want automatic expungement. The reason why we want automatic expungement and not just regular expungement is that, thank you, dear. Reason why we want automatic expungement, because it's a real thing if people have to go physically into court to go get their records expunged. So we not only just want money for expungement, but we want it to be automatic within our state. Our state has a truncated court system where all the court systems are not just automatically connected. So we have to be able to put money into that to put more people in the prosecutor's office. And that's kind of like a reality of it. And also making sure that we have more people working in the legal aid offices to help people with that process. So automatic expungement is what we want, not just expungement, because if you have to go get it to the court system, that's a day off of work you have to deal with. That's public transit that you may have to deal with. And that might have to be able to deal with lawyer fees that you may have to deal with. So we don't want just expungement. We want automatic expungement. So that's what we're pushing for in the House. That's one of the key big differences in the House compared to the Senate. Also, too, is the amount of money that is used for tax. In the Senate, they're trying to do 15% of tax. In the House, we're doing 10%. There's a big difference. All of us are adults on here, so we understand the importance of having tax being put into stuff. Also, too, another big key is the social equity program. We still have the social equity program. Can you guys hear me? Because I think we just pulled me off okay. With the social equity program, we're looking at what that looks like and also just changing the definition. There's a problematic couple out of California right now who anytime any state tries to do anything with social equity, they are suing the state, literally. I think their name is the Jensens, and they are suing like every state. They've sued California, New York, and really just stopping any type of social equity program. So one thing that is being worked on right now in the House is how do we frame social equity? We know there's been disproportionately that Black people have been affected by the war on drugs, but we have to put it in such a way to make sure that people can still be seen in this new commodity crop that is occurring here within the state of Ohio. One of the things that's being tinkered around with within the wording for social equity is called economically disadvantaged communities. And what we consider as an economically disadvantaged community is any community where every person that has received any type of criminal charge for cannabis, that would be looked at as how much tax revenue your community lost. So if your community didn't lose anybody for cannabis charges, then no money should be coming back to your community. And that's how we have to define it, as a tax loss, not based off of race. And so that is some of the ways that we're trying to legally figure out how can we deal with those economic losses to our communities and the war on drugs while we're dealing with this too. And so as we talk about this conversation of just even about adult use cannabis, we have to look at the wording of how we talk about stuff. And I say this is two great, profound Black women organizations. Words matter. And the reason why I say that, because I'm very anti using the word marijuana, because that is a racial slur and is rooted in the discrimination against brown people within our country. So we have to really just look at even how we talk about it. And I don't like to use the word recreational, because anything that you do, it's just not something you play with. It's adult use cannabis. That's what it is, adult use cannabis. So as we have these conversations within our community, words matter, and how we talk about things matter too. And even if everybody else is saying the word marijuana, Mary Jane, pot, is one of those things where your mama taught you better. So if you know better, you're gonna do better. This is a do better moment. So just using the words adult use cannabis is what it is. Everybody has a cannabinoid system. And so as we talk about this, cannabinoids is something we already have within our system. It's also within this cannabis plant already. So words matter. Please use cannabis. I really cringe when people say the word marijuana, because it just comes from a background of how it became illegal, and that was dealing with the discrimination of brown people in our country. So you're probably wondering, how can I get involved? There's a lot of stuff going on at the State House. There's House Bill 354 that the House wants to pass. There's House Bill 86, which is a Senate pass. And there's issue 2, which is what you probably voted on. I got some information for you. So if you're looking for information on how you can get involved, one, I want you to text my cell phone number. And the reason I'm gonna tell you this why, I put my cell phone in the chat, but I'm gonna send you something special. It's 216-413-8932. That's my cell phone number. But the reason why I'm gonna send you, I want you to text me, but I couldn't share because I'm having a little technical difficulties. But it's just really just hold on. Okay. You can't, my filter is acting up right now, but it's a comms doc that kind of explains the difference between each one. And so I'll definitely make sure that I send that to everyone who texts me with their email address right now. Do that right now while we see here on the line. Also, too, there's an opportunity for everyone to provide feedback for the draft language for the adult use cannabis. They just had a deadline for yesterday. The next set of draft rules Oh, thank you. You're so sweet. Thank you for putting that in the chat. The next set of draft rules are due March 12th. Those are the feedback on it. So what I want to do is make sure our office sends you the information. We need everyone on this Zoom providing feedback. This is going to affect our communities. This is going to affect our economies. We should be concerned to making sure that the Pookies and Ray Rays in our life, and maybe yourself, can be able to get a job when it comes to this market. So please send me a text. I haven't received one yet. And let me know that you are concerned about cannabis here in the state of Ohio. And I want whoever did that, thank you. Thank you for putting that in the chat too.
Thank you so much, Representative Brent. We do have some questions in the chat, but first, could you please repeat your cell phone number for us?
Okay, it's 216-413-8932. And the text messages are coming through. Thank you so much. So
We do have a quick question for you, if you have a few minutes. Will there be any restrictions on public places where adult use cannabis can be smoked?
So right now, depending on what bill you look at, if you voted on, there will be allowed to have public smoking. Now, there is a public smoking ban for House Bill 354, which is the cannabis bill in the House. House Bill 86 was from the Senate, which Senator Smith talked about. There is a public ban in both of those bills. So this is why you need to provide feedback to our rules, because most of the things are going to get decided by a bunch of dudes. I'm just saying, and they don't look like the people on the Zoom. So I'm gonna send you guys the information because I need you, everyone on here, black, blue, purple, to make sure you provide feedback.
Thank you so much, Representative Brent. We appreciate you joining this forum and speaking to us. Okay, so our next speaker is Honorable Judge Lauren C. Moore, a Cleveland Municipal Court judge who graduated from Shaker Heights High School and received her bachelor's degree in English from Spelman College. Judge Moore has served as the mental health court judge and currently presides over the Greater Cleveland Drug Court, where she inspires people to begin and maintain their journey to sobriety. Welcome, Judge Lauren C. Moore.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. And thank you for including me in this important conversation. As stated before, Ohio voters did approve a measure legalizing recreational marijuana or adult use cannabis in deference to Representative Brent in November. And that made Ohio the 24th state to allow adult cannabis use for non-medical purposes. So if you're at least 21, you can now use, buy, and grow your own plants in your own house. And as stated, the problems are that the Ohio legislature is still trying to change or fine-tune the law. And as of now, there's nowhere to purchase it outside a medical marijuana dispensary. So this legalization can be considered a good thing or a bad thing. And there's legitimacy to both sides of the argument. While it's a good thing that the marijuana laws may not continue to be used against people of color, its use and consumption shouldn't necessarily be encouraged and should be prohibited when participating in activities like operating vehicles and heavy machinery and public transportation. And a person can still get charged with OVI, that's impaired driving. And they are devising scientific ways to detect impairment, because the usual field sobriety tests for alcohol don't usually work when we're talking about adult use cannabis. So here's some legal context. It's important to understand the history of enforcement of marijuana laws, and Representative Brent did allude to that. The enforcement has always been racialized. It began in the 30s when Harry Anslinger, the first commissioner of the now defunct Federal Bureau of Narcotics, led a campaign against cannabis. He perpetuated intense racial bias about users and capitalizing on false claims that it could cause people to commit crimes. He intentionally called cannabis, as Representative Brent said, by its Spanish name, marijuana, to associate it with Mexican immigrants and people of color. He also tied cannabis use to jazz music by saying that the jazz was evil because it was created by people under the influence of drugs. So the war on drugs continued and accelerated under Nixon, who had disdain for anti-Vietnam War protesters and people of color. Because he couldn't legally criminalize being Black or being against the Vietnam War, the Nixon administration sought to disrupt these communities by getting the public to associate heroin with Black people and marijuana with hippies, and then criminalizing them. And this is a direct quote from Nixon. "We can arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news." And this propaganda ruined lives, and began the trend towards mass incarceration. And today, many Black Americans continue to sit in prison under mandatory life sentences, while the legal weed industry, run primarily by white men, is projected to bring in $45 billion with a B dollars in 2024. Although whites and Blacks use adult use cannabis, or I'm going to say weed, because I think that's probably the most popular term, at roughly the same equal rates, Black people are almost 4 times more likely to be arrested for possession. And this happens even though the violators present little risk to public safety, and it's considered as harmless as the reasonable consumption of alcohol or tobacco. And the consequences of the hundreds of thousands of arrests every year for weed offenses extend far beyond just fines or even outrageously long sentences. Even the arrest, not even the conviction, but just the arrest that does not result in a conviction, can stay on a person's record for years, impacting future prospects for jobs, loans, eligibility for public housing and student financial aid, child custody determinations, and even immigration status. So for decades, the alleged odor of weed has been used as an excuse to justify racial profiling and perform warrantless stops and searches. Associations between Blacks and marijuana or weed frame Blacks as inherently criminal or bad. When non-Blacks use it, though, it's considered isolated or recreational or medicinal. And these disparities are directly related to the intentionally created popular belief that weed use among Black people is inherently connected to criminal activity. So in Cleveland, still some police officers still issue tickets for possession of marijuana, but the prosecutors, they summarily dismiss them in court. But they still get tickets. I still see tickets on a daily basis. So how does the legalization of marijuana affect drug court, the drug court that I preside over? Drug courts may make exceptions for participants who have a medical marijuana card. To get most forms of medical marijuana, you do have to have a written recommendation from a doctor, not a prescription, because most cannabis is not FDA approved. You also have to have a condition that qualifies for medical marijuana use. And usually people who come through our drug court, it's usually anxiety or pain management. And if they can demonstrate that, they can get a medical marijuana ID card. Because the Judge Larry A. Jones Drug Court, which I preside over, gets federal money from the Bureau of Justice Affairs and SAMHSA, we have to be careful about allowing people to participate if they're actively consuming marijuana. The federal government, believe it or not, still makes marijuana illegal, and it's a Schedule I drug, just like heroin and LSD and fentanyl. And we know all the horrible stories we hear about fentanyl, about how it can be so fatal at such small doses. That's a Schedule II drug. But because medical marijuana is considered medical, if we denied an individual participation in drug court, it could be considered discrimination, like we're discriminating against them for their medical condition, or it could be a violation of their rights. And you may know that drug testing is one of the hallmarks of drug courts. So we're always drug testing. That keeps the integrity in the system. And to date, we are still trying to come up with a comprehensive protocol as it relates to weed use and drug court participation. So right now we're doing it on a case-by-case basis. So in conclusion, we also need to continue to advocate for treatment and recovery because it is possible to become addicted and debilitated from excessive weed use, and as well as a vast expungement campaign, which was talked about earlier, for people who got caught up in this race-based war on weed. We do need to do automatic expungement. I think that was tried earlier last year. The city hall wanted us to summarily expunge all those cases. And I think the Supreme Court had to put the brakes on a little bit because it was a technical issue about how we would get that accomplished. But it's still on our to-do list, and hopefully it will happen soon, especially if the Ohio State Legislature is going to help us do that. So thank you. If there are any other questions, I will be happy to answer them if I can.
I am not seeing any questions in the chat yet, but thank you so much for being here tonight and for
My pleasure.
Yes, thank you so much. We're gonna move on to the next section. Okay, I have the pleasure of introducing Wallace Green tonight. Wallace Green is a licensed independent chemical dependency counselor, clinical supervisor with a degree in social work. Mr. Green has worked in the field of treatment and criminal justice for over 25 years. In 2003, Mr. Green began working with the Cleveland Municipal Court Judicial Division as a supervision probation officer. He was promoted to treatment coordinator for the court in 2004 and also serves as a drug court case manager. Sorry, my screen went dark. Also serves as a drug court case manager working exclusively with the toughest cases. Thank you for being here tonight, Mr. Green. Is it letting you unmute? Yeah, you should be getting prompted to unmute. There you go.
Am I unmuted?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right, great. All right, I've got screen I want to share here. See it?
Yes.
Okay. All right, well, thank you very much. I appreciate being invited here and talking about a very, very important subject, and learning a lot and getting some good information. So I hope to keep that going. Legalization of marijuana, like the judge said, in terms of Ohio, it's kind of been it's like hitting a moving target. There's a lot going on. We've got some bills that are in the work. Things are kind of changing. And the information I have is the most up to date, as far as I know, from the Supreme Court. And this was administered on the 1st and the 16th. So it's pretty much up to date. As far as recreational marijuana, you heard about that, 24th state becoming involved with that. But it's been a strange rollout, like she said, like the judge said, and the congressman. It passed on December 7th, yet there are no authorized dealers to sell it yet. And the Division of Cannabis Control, which is handling the licenses, has not given authorization for the medical marijuanas to distribute recreational or adult use cannabis. And again, there's some other bills that are in the works. Also understand that when it becomes legalized, use does increase, and it does increase. This is a Washington study from 2019, and it shows it broken down into age brackets. So we have to be aware of that and prepared for that. Again, where you smoke, it's only indoors for right now. And like the senator said, that Senate bill has got some other things that are changing. I don't like the fact that they're reducing the amount of THC, because what's going to happen is you're just going to chase people to other states over to Michigan, and you're going to lose your tax bracket. So it just makes more sense to just stay the same. As far as raising the taxes are concerned, if that puts us in the middle, I would be okay with that. What the law does not do, understand it doesn't declassify marijuana or cannabis as a level 1. It's still a condition 1 drug, which means it doesn't have any medicinal purposes. That's a classification. And of course, we know it does. And they need to change that classification. I don't know if it's going to be done this time around, but once you change the classification, then you can start to study it. You can start to get some documentation going. But as long as it's level 1, it kind of stays in a gray area. Create specific provisions with regards to expungement. Like he said, that is coming, hopefully, but it's not in there now. And of course, the dispensaries, hopefully that'll change so that they can do that. Otherwise, people are going to be purchasing out of state. Purchase, so you can have 2.5 ounces, just so that you understand that's roughly about 4 packs of cigarettes with regards to the legal amount, or 15 grams of extract, which is about the weight of 1 AAA battery. Anything over that is going to be illegal. Legalization, what it does and doesn't do, understand this, what it does decriminalize its possession and consumption, but it does not deproblemize its use. Because I've got clients who think that, once it becomes legalized, that their problems are going to go away. No, it's not. If you had a problem when you used and it was illegal, you're going to have a problem when you use and it's legal. Okay, so they need to understand that and recognize it's not, it's not just a free ticket to a problem-free life. Impaired operations, hopefully this doesn't become a catch-22 or a quagmire. Because the problem with that is that, and we're hoping, like they said, if we have it legalized, that you don't harass people, because you could have the smell on your clothes and not be using. And that's the problem that you have with marijuana as opposed to alcohol. With alcohol, when you test, it's really related to how much alcohol is in your system as to how impaired you are. Unfortunately, when it comes to marijuana is fat soluble, and the amount of marijuana in your system or the levels may have nothing at all to do with your impairment. So it's going to be tricky. And if people start calling you in, it can take up a lot of time. It can take up court cases, and you may win, but after coming to court, hiring a lawyer, missing days to work, etc. So that's going to be kind of a tricky situation. It can be problematic because, it does have problems, okay, in terms of vehicle, emergency department use, brain development, and addiction. So, it does come with its problems, and we have to be ready for that. In terms of treatment, just like with alcohol and any other legal substance, it may be prohibited by the court if it's reasonably related to your rehabilitation of the offender, if you have some relationship with use and the crime that you committed, and if it's related to your criminality now or in the future. So in other words, people aren't just going to put you on restriction for marijuana use or cannabis use just because you're under arrest. There has to be a tie-in. It can't be blanket, because if it was, that just creates more problems. Procedural issues for supervision. The problem with supervision is that there's no real written policy in terms of how you're going to use, and there are three things that are going on. There's written policy, there's expressed behaviors, and there's enforcement of the rules. All three of those things can be different. And at the same time, kind of watching them and monitoring can be different. What's going on in each room in terms of court and the way the judges feel, that can all be different. So there's no kind of universal coverage of how everything is going to be handled. And right now it's good because we need data. And if people are doing different things, and we can start to compare and talk those things over. California, for instance, has just banned across the state testing for marijuana because it's too ambiguous. Different people are doing different things, so they just don't test. And that's where that term California sober comes from, because that means that, you know, you may be using marijuana, but they're not testing for it. So the larger issues are you've got agency rules with regards to tolerance. So as people are on probation, you've got some agencies that will not take a marijuana card. You've got some in which they will. Recreational marijuana may be used in some cases, etc. So these are all things that are going to be different. The impact that's going on with the family and success as far as supervision overall, all these things have to be monitored. Okay, and also in terms of harm reduction. So somebody may be using crack cocaine, somebody may be using heroin, and of course the death rate is high, but at the same time, if they switch and they're starting to use marijuana, that tends to be harm reduction because they're not going to die. They're going to, and depending upon how they're using it, it might be able to help them. So in terms of harm reduction, this is new with regards to treatment, and different treatment facilities are doing differently, so it's important. Normalizing the use, it's going to be a different world. You're going to see these places are going to be popping up. You know, we kind of have to get used to it. Recreational adult use, again, that's important. And I guess, you know, myself included, need to start shifting in that direction, you know, so that we're not using that term of marijuana. We're all going to be winging it. So, you know, when I went to the, Supreme Court, you know, there is no written instruction manual for this. We don't have the history. So we have to take notes in terms of supervision. We have to meet with our supervisors, units, department. We got to see what each other's are doing and what's going on. And it's going to be a difficult task on both sides of the desk. The officers are going to have it difficult, and so are the clients. Clients may try to be thinking that they have a marijuana card, but at the same time, abstinence might be the only way for them because problems may persist as they're using the card. And at some point in time, they may have to understand that total abstinence might be the only way. Lastly, in terms of probation, you know, you have to give it your all on both sides. You have to be in sync and not out of step. The world is changing, and you've got some old hardliners that are, you know, big book thumpers, and they're thinking the only way to do this is, you know, just total abstinence. No, you become out of step. And and treatment used to be like the Olympic diner. I'm going to show my age here. This is back from Saturday Night Live. If you remember this skit, you know, this is where they would come into the restaurant and they would try to order something and they'd let them know cheeseburger, 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 Pepsi. That's all they sold. So if you came in there looking for something else, that's not what you were going to get. You're getting a cheeseburger, you're getting a Pepsi, and that's it. So that's kind of the way treatment used to be. Treatment was kind of AA based. That was the way you did it. There was no other way. So we got to understand that other things are happening now, and you have to start to open up, and we have to start to study the issue. And at the same time, you know, my only caveat is the fact that don't have the person who may possibly be able to use something like marijuana and may be able to use it medically sitting next to somebody who can never use anything. Okay, those are two separate groups. They need to be away from each other. And because one is just going to trigger the other one. You know, the people who cannot use, they can't be around people that are smelling like marijuana or, you know, having that effect. Those groups need to be separated. We don't know what we don't know. We don't want to sabotage things. And you have to watch your own biases for what you feel the issue is. And you have to collect data. Okay, because at one point in time, AA was the new kid on the block, and they didn't think that would work. Okay, but 90 years later, you know, it is one of the best ways in order to maintain sobriety. So all this stuff is new. We don't have the data and we need to work on collecting. Okay. So if we've got old ways, you got to put them aside, and we have to let the science be our guide, and at the same time collect the information logically and honestly. And that's all I have. And if there are any questions, I'd be glad to entertain them. If not, then I just want to say it's been a pleasure, and I hope you got something out of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. It looks like we do have 2 questions. The first one being, how might medically assisted treatment program compliance be affected? This is for both Mr. Green and Judge Moore.
How might they be affected?
Yes.
Well, I think that medical marijuana kind of treats, or rather kind of affects traditional treatment, because traditional treatment is abstinence only, so that it doesn't recognize that. So it's changing now that treatments are starting to recognize it, so that they're saying, you know what, if somebody has a medical marijuana card for a legitimate reason, then, they're starting to treat them. Judge, if you had anything to add to that? Shion?
I am.
Oh,
I was just going to say, theoretically, we would ignore a positive test for weed, but a positive test for any other substance, any cocaine or anything else, meth, we would have to look and see how we could up their treatment in some kind of a way. But if they have a medical marijuana card and we put them in the program, we know that there's a possibility that marijuana can be detected in their drug test.
Thank you. We have 2 more questions really quickly. How do you see this playing out in the healthcare environment as it relates to employment?
well, in terms of employment, the Commerce Department or Chamber of Commerce, it's going to be, they haven't changed their rules. Employers are allowed to do what they want to do in terms of what they want to test for. So, if they don't want you to use, and, that's their prerogative. So, you need to keep that in mind. And a lot of employers, you really don't want or wouldn't feel comfortable with somebody using, in terms of like airline pilot or something that's really focus intensive, so yeah, you have to recognize, because it's legal doesn't mean that other agencies or other employment services or employers can't test for.
Right. Yes, they would have to defer to the policies.
And the last question for now is, how long before you anticipate the legalization of marijuana to be fully entrenched within the state?
1 year,
All right.
possibly as early as the fall of this year, but I'm imagining probably not until 25. Judge?
I don't have a clue. I know that a lot of people are anxious. A lot of people are doing what they've always done, though. If they smoked it before, they're smoking it now. They feel that they can just do it in a freer fashion. But I'm not really sure. I defer to your prognostication, Wallace.
Yeah, I've been watching it pretty closely, and in order for these bills, and they're going to battle it out. And like I said, I really don't see anything happening earlier than the fall, and more than likely it'll be early 25.
Well, you heard it here. Thank you both for your presentations tonight. We're going to get to the next speaker. Would you be able to unshare your screen,
Oh,
Mr. Wallace?
absolutely.
One second. a lot of screens going, sorry. All right, and it is now my pleasure to introduce Dr. Martina Moore. Dr. Martina Moore has been providing professional trainings and development services to others for over 20 years. Dr. Moore holds a PhD in counseling education and supervision. She is also the president and CEO of Moore Counseling and Mediation Services Incorporated, which provides outpatient treatment to clients who struggle with alcohol and drug addiction. Thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you for having me. So this technology, as soon as we started, my internet went out. So hopefully it will not go out again. Hopefully we can get through this. So thank you for having me tonight. And much of what I'm going to say has already been said by the other presenters. So I'm going to kind of go through this. But one of the things I'm going to emphasize as a clinician is that addiction is addiction. And I am such a proponent, and I will say this, of medical marijuana. And or we can say cannabis, however, what term I want to be appropriate. And I want to emphasize, though, there are people who are suffering that are addicted. And we see them every day, we see them all day, and we do understand. And many times we minimize the use of cannabis and say, oh, people are not addicted to that. But that is so untrue. And we see so many individuals on a daily basis that are addicted. So in our DSM-5, this is the diagnostic criteria of mental disorders that we actually diagnose people from, is the same criteria for all classes of the drugs are there. And so cannabis is right there with every other drug. And I'll tell you, in the 30 plus years that I have been doing this, probably over 70% of the individuals that I see that come into me because of cannabis use hold a diagnostic criteria for cannabis use disorder. And so we know, and this is our criteria, there are 11, I'm not going to go through all of these, but it is the same criteria that we use for every other substance. And it really is a rigorous criteria, and it's not so easy just to diagnose someone with it. It takes time. It takes certain behaviors that are over and over, or what we consider reoccurrent. And the biggest issue that we see are consequences as a result of a person still using, and even having consequences socially, occupationally, recreationally, in their family and their relationships. And we'll see it over and over again. And so when we diagnose someone now, which I'm happy about that we did change the criteria, that it's on a spectrum of mild, moderate, and severe. And most of the time when we see someone on the mildness of the spectrum, those are individuals that probably can control their use. Those are individuals who we can look at and say, okay, you're not on the same area as someone that may have moderate or severe use. Someone who has moderate or severe use has suffered consequences that have resulted in them really having some significant impairment as a result of their use. So people will ask me, can a person use cannabis in a way that does not get them into a way where it's unsafe? And yes, I have individuals that are mild on the spectrum that use it in that manner. And I have people who use it who never hit the spectrum at all. But that is rare. When I get them, usually when we get them, it's because they're in moderate or severe use. And so I want us to understand that yes, there's a group that can use in a way that would, if we want to classify it as the adult use of cannabis in a responsible way, but then there are those individuals that are not. And those are the individuals oftentimes we see in the court system. Those are the individuals that end up in my office. And those are the individuals who also have what we call sometimes a co-occurring disorder, where they may also have a behavioral health disorder like anxiety, like depression, like schizophrenia, like both bipolar disorder and other disorders that are exacerbated as a result of their use. And then comes in the big piece, which is the employer use. And so in employment, employers don't have to accommodate for this. They don't have to permit it, and they do not. Many employers have what's called a drug-free safety program. There are policy outlines that they're allowed to test. They can test for random, they can test for reasonable suspicion, pre-employment, post-accident, return to duty. And so if someone is making a decision that they want to work and they want to still use, that can be a consequence, and they can still lose their employment as a result of still using. And employers do not have to adhere to any of this. They can still have their drug-free safety program. It's just like with opiates. Employers have the same thing. If someone has an opiate use disorder, or if someone's on an opiate, they have to go to their employer and say, I'm on an opiate. It's up to that medical review officer to determine, is it for a medical use? Is it prescribed for a medical condition? And can you still work and perform your duties and still be on this drug, even if it is for medical use? And it's the same way with medical marijuana. Employers still can make that decision. So employers are still permitted to establish and enforce drug testing. And some of them can say zero tolerance. We won't allow you to go to treatment. We won't allow you a second chance. An employer can terminate an employee's employment due to the use of cannabis. And nothing in the act interferes, again, like we talked about with federal restrictions. If someone's in a safety sensitive position, driving a truck, operating machinery, flying a plane, being a train conductor, working on the railroad tracks, working for the gas company, the illuminating company, those individuals fall in what we call safety sensitive positions. They can lose their jobs. And so we're telling people, okay, we have this adult use of cannabis, you do. But as an adult, you have a responsibility if you're going to work in a place where they have a drug-free safety program. And if individuals say, well, I'm still going to use, and then I suffer the consequences. And so as a treatment provider, I explain this to my clients clearly and have helped them to make the decision. Do you still want to use, or do you want to risk that your employer may be testing randomly and you could still test positive for cannabis use? So there are some other arguments against adult use of cannabis. The public health concern, and critics point to the potential health risks. And there are respiratory issues that can be impaired cognitive functioning. We all know about the amotivational syndrome. There is a lot of speculation about that. There is some research that says, yes, it's there. There's also some research that says that in low levels. And then the youth impact. There is still an impact on our youth. If someone is growing it in their home, it's more accessible for youth for it to be there. And so that's something that we still need to think about. Wallace talked about the traffic safety. We don't know how this is going to work out, but we do know that it can impair coordination and reaction time, and that there can be impaired driving incidents and traffic incidents as a result. And then there's the pros that people talk about, which is the economic benefit. The senator was on here talking about the economic benefit, the tax benefit. The Ohio Capital Journal reported a prediction of $260 million to the Ohio's economy as a result of this. And then there are people that talk about the individual freedom. And of course, people want their individual freedom. Supporters argue that adults should have the freedom to make choices about their bodies. And I agree with that. And for us to also understand, with that choice, there can still be addiction, and that you'll have to make the choice with your employment. If your employer still says, well, you can't show up here and be on it because we're going to test you. And if we test you and you still show up positive, then you risk losing your employment. And then there's the arguments for medical benefit. And I am such a proponent of medical marijuana. I have seen it be effective in some of my family's lives who have things like cancer and I have had clients that have been struggling with things like anxiety. And yes, the medical marijuana has been helpful. But when we're talking about medical marijuana, it's monitored. It is monitored in a way, and the doctors are saying, okay, this is the level that we think that will assist you and help you. And then the harm reduction, and Wallace tapped on this some, but I'm taking it from the other piece with the harm reduction, potentially reducing the risk of things like fentanyl being in someone's cannabis. And so if someone is growing their own cannabis, they're able to have their own cannabis, and then they don't have the potential of it being laced with something like fentanyl. So there is a huge harm reduction in that area as well. And then final concerns from me as a practitioner. Again, the health risks. We can't dismiss that. Just like cigarettes, cigars, there are health risks. The impact on memory. There's a huge body of research that shows that there's an impact on memory for those who use cannabis in large amounts and cognitive functioning. And then again, the addiction potential. With any drug, there's an addiction potential. Alcohol, cannabis, opiates, benzodiazepines, barbiturates, LSD, amphetamines, all of the drugs, there is an addiction potential. Whether if it's legal or not, there is an addiction potential. And then lastly, the mental health concerns. And I cannot stress this enough. The exacerbation that drugs like cannabis can have for people who already have things like anxiety, depression, or psychosis can be outstanding and can really, really have a high impact on those who may already have a predisposition for something like psychosis. And so we still have to understand that it's important for someone to sit down with their doctor before they decide to do this, to understand what runs in their family line, to look at the potential of what can be exacerbated as a result, and not just make the decision because I want to try this, or because I'm an adult, or because it is now legal, that it's going to be safe for me. There can really be some harmful effects. So that's the end of what I want to say, and I'm open to taking any questions.
Thank you so much. I do not see any questions quite yet, but you know they're going to keep trickling in. That was a great presentation, and we appreciate you for being here tonight. We're going to go to our last speaker of the night. And for those of you who might not have seen it, I did drop our evaluation in the chat. So if you have to run anytime soon, please evaluate this program so that we know if you liked it, so that we could do more things like this moving forward. 1 second. We are at our final speaker of the night, Thomas Pipkin. Thomas Pipkin is currently Director of Programming, Training, and Quality Assurance for Cuyahoga County Juvenile Court in Cleveland, Ohio. He has worked for the court in differing capacities for 14 years. He's a graduate of Cleveland State University with a master's in public administration and a bachelor in communication. Thank you for being here tonight.
Thanks for having me. Just to get started, as you stated during the introduction, I've been employed at the court at this point for about 14 years, and primarily during this time, I would say at least about 12 years of that time, I've been involved with our specialized dockets here at the court. So that runs the gamut from juvenile drug court, our family recovery court, our mental health court dockets, our safe harbor, which is our human trafficking docket, and a couple of others over time. I'm speaking specifically from a lens of juvenile justice or juvenile justice involved youth. As of right now, with the laws changing as they have, I think right now a key focus from the court standpoint is education. Things that we're hearing on a consistent basis, even from participants in our juvenile drug court docket, is that marijuana is legal, or I should say adult use cannabis is legal at this time. But it's not. We're dealing with juveniles. Primarily our court involved populations are from the ages of 14 to 16 and a half years old. So, as has been touched on by Dr. Moore, these are youth that are still developing from, a mental standpoint. Their brains haven't fully developed until they're in their mid to late 20s. So their use of marijuana or any other substance at this point in time really has some serious impacts on them. And as stated, by the time that a young man or young woman comes to the court's attention, especially if they've, been identified as having a moderate to high use from a substance abuse standpoint, this is impacting their activities of daily living. It's become a problem either in their homes, in the school, or in the community. So what we're doing from a court standpoint is really just our focus is the in-home piece. And that's going to be one of the key things. All of our primary treatment modalities that we utilize at the court are in-home based. which will essentially maybe definitely be impacted down the road as Wallace stated. If a year from now, if the state of Ohio is more so entrenched statewide and, embracing or, um, seeing a regular use of marijuana by adults in the homes, that's definitely going to have a direct impact on our kids. I know at the court, a lot of times we say, hey, kids get it honestly, so, you have a kid that's acting out. You may not have met the parent, but then you see the parent and they're comfortable and they show out at school. Hey, the kid has learned some of these behaviors. So, there's definitely going to be an impact, especially in as it relates to just having access to marijuana once things actually pan out. So, like I said, our primary focus is that in-home piece. So we utilize a lot of things like multisystemic therapy, which is an in-home therapy modality. We use ICT, integrated co-occurring treatment, or in-home behavioral therapy. So our key is to make sure that we're utilizing and building skills not only in the youth that are court involved, but in those parents that are in those homes. That's typically the key for us from a court standpoint. With our juvenile court docket, what we try to do is assess youth as early as possible once they come to the court's attention. We have our early intervention diversion center now. All kids that come to the court's attention are referred to our diversion center. In that diversion center, that's when they get those initial assessments. We do some screeners. If they flag high for substance abuse, at that point, we make a referral to another agency to do an additional assessment on that youth. We try to use these assessments to make determinations and decisions in relations to hopefully providing the youth some off ramps from continued court involvement. So that is really why we have our juvenile drug court docket right now. It is a diversion program. We're certified by the Supreme Court of Ohio. This diversion program gives a youth opportunity, a youth and their family. It's voluntary, but if they choose to participate, once they go through the different phases of our juvenile drug court docket, they have the opportunity to have their cases sealed and expunged like it never happened. So these are one of those off ramps that we try to utilize for youth to come to the court's attention. One thing that we do see and that the court is trying to focus on, and Ms. Brent spoke to this, sometimes there's some disparities that we identify. Who's actually being afforded the opportunity to have access to a juvenile drug court docket or things of that sort. A lot of times, in it, we've seen, not as many Black and brown faces that are participating in these dockets. So what the court is doing from a transformative standpoint is really try to look at our data, make sure we're monitoring who comes, who goes, and not just look at it once a year, but look at it on a monthly basis to try to, implement some different changes so that we can make sure kids that look like, myself aren't falling through the cracks. We see that, a lot of times, even from a legal standpoint, youth who are living in certain areas, they don't necessarily receive the same level of charges, or certain aspects of the charges are looked over. Where a suburb, they may in a report actually, bring to light there was some use of some type of substance, a controlled substance during the commission of a crime or whatever the case may be, whereas other areas of our county may not do that. So we're just trying to make sure that we're as intent as possible to try to screen kids on the front end, and try to make sure we get that input from their parents and get those good investigative reports so we can say, hey, this kid will be hopefully better suited by being diverted from the official court process and have the opportunity to engage in one of our specialized dockets. From a court standpoint, we've really, like I said, from as of right now, we're kind of staying the course. We're focusing on that in-home piece. We try not to do as much IOP services. We try to really get to the root cause of what's going on in the home and getting that buy-in from parents to help impact change on the youth that we're serving. I do see this 7:56 right now, so I do want to be cognizant of the time. But I just want to give you a quick scope. I feel like some of the other presenters did touch a lot, especially Dr. Moore, on some of those things that we really focus on from a mental health standpoint. A lot of times kids have, maybe dually diagnosed, or they may be self-medicating at a younger age by the use of marijuana. And, we try to do everything we can to keep a kid in the community and treat them in their homes, and only utilizing things like out-of-home placement or residential as a last-ditch effort when it comes to really being as impactful as possible with the youth that we're serving. So if anyone has any questions that are specific to juvenile court, feel free to ask them, and I'll hopefully be able to answer them for you.
All right, this is our final call for questions. Thank you so much for being here, Mr. Pipkin, tonight. As we close, thanks again to our President Frazier, Councilwoman Meredith Turner, Chair of the Social Action Committee, my co-host tonight from the NCNW, Essence Doucette, and the Cleveland Section NCNW President, Monica McClelland, the Publicity and Technology Committees of Greater Cleveland Alumni Chapter, the members of GCAC and the NCNW, and to our special guests, Senator Smith, Representative Brent, Judge Moore, Mr. Green, Dr. Moore, Mr. Pipkins, and everyone that joined us tonight. Please let us know if you have any final questions. We put a lot of resources in the chat. We did add an evaluation so that you can tell us how you enjoyed the program tonight. And I wanted to lastly invite you to join us on Thursday, March 7th at 6 p.m. via Zoom for another virtual discussion regarding redistricting. It'll be titled Redistricting Ohio Again, Conversation in Partnership with the League of Women Voters and the Shaker Heights Public Chapter. Thank you, and you have a great night. Oh, and early voting started. Election day is March 19th, so make sure you get out and vote. That went well.
Just wanted to tell you, excellent job. Had to step away. Had to put out a couple little fires on the phone and stuff. But excellent job, Aaliyah. Excellent job.
Thank you, and thank you.
You held it down.
I was trying. I have so many desktops open. I kept getting lost on my screen, but it went well, and it just went.
And it perfectly goes. It's 8 o'clock. You were like, boom, boom, boom. The girl after my own heart. Let's get it moving.
All right. You have a good rest of your night.
You too. Bye-bye. Oh, it's still recording. Oops. You could edit that part.
Yeah. Good night.
Bye-bye.